Good afternoon and welcome to all of you, all the participants, and of course the speakers in this webinar with the title A World Without Limitations on Nuclear Weapons, Addressing the Demise of Nuclear Weapon Treaties. My name is Thomas Heinolzi, and I'm an executive advisor of Mayors for Peace. Next week, the last US-Russian nuclear arms limitation treaty, New START, will expire. If there is no agreement reached to stick to the limits contained in this treaty, and it doesn't look like, the world will usher into an unbridled nuclear arms race, further destabilizing international security, especially in Europe. Against this threatening background, the 22nd of January marked the 5th anniversary of the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW. Nearly 100 states have joined the TPNW already and committed themselves to pursue security without nuclear weapons. At a time of rising nuclear salience in Europe, it is crucial to recognize the huge potential and achievements of the TPNW. You might have heard half an hour ago, it was announced that the doomsday clock has advanced further. Now it stands at 85 seconds to the annihilation of mankind. So we are really at a very dangerous time. It was never closer to midnight ever. During this webinar, we will now first listen to introductory remarks from the President of the European chapter of Mayors for Peace, Mayor Barnosel, followed by Melissa Park, the Executive Director of ICAN, the international campaign against nuclear weapons that won the Nobel Peace Prize. And then we will hear from the four panelists, to be followed by a question and answer period. We are very glad that we have so many participants, so it is all the more important that everyone who is not speaking mutes the micro. Thank you. And with this, the floor goes to Mayor Barnosel.
Hello everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. I would like to thank you also, the excellent panelists, who I'm sure will provide to all of us the tools to a better understanding of the international situation regarding nuclear weapons. Nowadays, the world is currently facing a dangerous nuclear arms race. In recent months, more nuclear weapons have been deployed in European countries, making the world and Europe in particular less safe. At the same time, billions of euros are being spent on weapons instead of essential services such as healthcare, education, and social support. If this continues, global security will weaken and people's well-being will suffer even more. As local governments, those and our priority is the well-being of our citizens. We are all committed to working towards peace and nuclear disarmament. We accept this responsibility for our citizens, especially those affected by war, violence, or nuclear weapons. Together with civil society, we must take an action to promote peace and nuclear disarmament and build a context for common security. As members of Mayors for Peace, we are ready to make this happen. Thank you very much for attending this webinar. Hope is useful to all of us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alba, for your remarks. And now we are looking forward to listen to Melissa Park from ICAN. And congratulations, Melissa. ICAN had another successful year full of activities. And please tell us what is in particular needed now.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, great. And thank you to Mayors for Peace for the opportunity to speak. I particularly want to, oh my goodness me, I'm just making sure that I'm doing the right thing here. I want to welcome you to this important webinar hosted by Mayors for Peace, coming as it does during times of enormous volatility and heightened nuclear danger, as represented, as Thomas said, by the hands of the doomsday clock being moved forward to 85 seconds to midnight just a little while ago. In recent times, the world has witnessed several nuclear-armed states, especially the US, Russia, and Israel, acting in violation of international law and without regard to the institutions that have been established since the end of World War II to promote peace and accountability. In the nuclear age, such actions pose an existential risk to all life on our planet. And it's clear that far from bringing stability to the world, as deterrence advocates claim, nuclear weapons are used to coerce and intimidate and are engendering a sense of impunity among countries that have them. We're also seeing, as Thomas said, the demise of the last arms control agreement between the US and Russia, which means there will now be no limits on the number and types of nuclear weapons that they can hold. And that's why it is so important that peace-minded countries and civil society galvanize support for multilateral action for the collective good. The UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is, of course, a shining example of such collective action. ICANN has had a wonderful cooperation with the Mayors for Peace on the ICANN Cities Appeal, in which cities in nuclear weapons and allied states call for their national governments to join the TPNW. Late last year, I visited Athens and I congratulated the Mayor of Athens for Athens having joined the ICANN Cities Appeal. And it was the 95th city in Greece to have joined the appeal. I think they're up to 99 now. And it was the 12th NATO capital to do so. The Mayor and I subsequently published a joint op-ed in one of the national newspapers on the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. And all of these things make a difference. They have an impact on national governments because local governments represent the people and where people live, and they are extremely important. So I want to thank Mayors for Peace for what you do to promote nuclear disarmament and the TPNW. And as we heard just last week on the 22nd of January, the TPNW celebrated the 5th anniversary of its coming into force. And during the past 5 years, the treaty has had a significant impact. It has closed the legal gap. It's codified that nuclear weapons are incompatible with international human rights and humanitarian law, with environmental protection, and with long-term security. It has broken the two-class system of powerful nuclear weapon states and powerless non-nuclear weapon states, and thus it has brought the issue of nuclear weapons into the hands of all states equally in the UN General Assembly. So it has democratized the nuclear weapons debate. It has reinforced the nuclear taboo that nuclear weapons can never be used because of the catastrophic humanitarian and environmental harm they cause. It provides the first international framework for assistance to communities and environments impacted by nuclear weapons use and testing. It's prompted financial institutions to divest billions of dollars from nuclear weapons. It's solidified the international consensus that nuclear threats are unacceptable, and it's provided a powerful challenge to the misguided and dangerous nuclear deterrence narrative of pro-nuclear states by showing that nuclear weapons threaten global security, they don't enhance it. And it has broken the dominance, as I mentioned, that nuclear weapon states have had on the public debate around nuclear weapons, and that is because of all of our collective efforts. The treaty provides a focus for civil society to mobilise around and support governments that want to abolish nuclear weapons, giving a concrete tool for engagement advocacy. We don't just ask for strong statements, we ask for concrete actions by cities, by parliamentarians, by financial institutions, and by governments. And as a result of these efforts, the treaty now has a global majority of countries as either full states parties or signatories. And we know there will be more by the time of the first TPNW review conference to be held in November this year, chaired by South Africa. And we expect the first TPNW review conference will provide a very clear contrast with the 11th NPT review conference to be held in April and May this year, for which the prospects are rather gloomy. Author Yuval Noah Harari talks about the power of human imagination to redirect our ingenuity from self-destruction to self-creation. And the TPNW is an example of such self-creation. It's where humanity is choosing dialogue over confrontation, diplomacy over militarization, and disarmament over proliferation. And as we celebrate the 5th anniversary of the TPNW coming into force, and as we look towards the inaugural TPNW review conference, I want to thank Mayors for Peace and all campaigners everywhere for your passion and commitment. And at this moment in time, our collective efforts to uphold international law, to attain justice, and to eliminate nuclear weapons are more important than ever. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And I also want to thank you on behalf of Mayors for Peace for an excellent cooperation. And I think it's very important that all who are active on our side cooperate very well, and indeed we do. And now we will turn to the 4 speakers that we have today. They are all from different countries, and all of them have a quite different personal profile. So we will not hear the same thing 4 times. We will hear very interesting remarks. And the first one will be Olga Karash from our house, Stop Belarusian Nukes. So as it is in the title of her organization, she's from Belarus, where she's persecuted as the leader of an important civil society organization. And she certainly, I guess, will address the stationing of Russian nuclear weapons in Belarus and the negative impact on human rights. And I ask you, Olga, as all the other speakers, please try to stay within 10 minutes, because I'm sure quite a number of the participants would like to have the chance to put a question and get an answer. Olga, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. My name is Olga Karachi. I'm a human rights defender from Belarus. Now I'm living in exile in Lithuania, and I'm leading of the Human Rights Center, Our House. So, we don't choose a time we live in, but we can choose the role in this time. I believe that we can change many things together, and why I'm here. In Belarus, I'm labeled as a terrorist, and I'm under the death penalty. I already I have been sentenced 12 years of prison, and I received 170,000 euro fines for my human rights activities. My organization was labeled 25 times extremist, and for every time, any activist and volunteer of our house can be imprisoned for 7 years. And so it's not a joke. And, I always was wondering why Alexander Lukashenko, very brutal, masculine man, is spending so much resources. He has nuclear weapons, he has an army, he has a lot of security services, etc. He spends so much energy, time, and resources just in his attempt to stop us. Very peaceful organization, human rights defense without defenders, without any weapons, without any violent activities. And once I understood, this is why, because Alexander Lukashenko believes in us much more than we believe in our power. And in my opinion, now, if we speak about European nuclear disarmament movement, our main weakness is that we don't believe in our power and our strengths as our opponents believe in us. And this is why we all are under very strange attacks and in very situation today. I want to return to the history of Belarus. Belarus was one of a nuclear-free country. In 1991, Democratic Belarus proposed the idea of a nuclear weapon-free zone in Europe at the UN General Assembly. And our strategical mission today, as Belarusians, we want to return to the idea common, together to start to build, or not start, of course, we are fighting already, but to fight together for European nuclear weapon-free zone. But if we speak about Europe, we mean Europe not in the current political borders. We mean Europe including Russia, Belarus, UK, and other countries. Why it's important, and why our campaigning now is important to be a part of wider European nuclear free movement. Because if you speak only about European nuclear disarmament campaign within the current political borders, it's quite weird. Because now the state propaganda from all sides speak about that we have to expect Russia aggression. We have to expect that it should be the war in Europe. And of course, it should be a little bit strange for Europeans if we are going to them and say, okay, let's remove European nuclear weapons. Yes, we have to remove European nuclear weapons, but including Russia. And when we started our campaign, it was started after the Belarusian referendum on February 27th, 2022, 4 days after the Russian aggression, because Lukashenko changed his constitution and changed the status of Belarus from the nuclear free to the nuclear state. And since at 25th of March 2023, Lukashenko and Putin signed the common agreement about sharing nuclear weapons to Belarus. Of course, we have UPA report about violations of human rights and about how it's illegal and what what is happening. But I want to speak today about some practical steps. What we need from you. Of course, we need your solidarity, but if you speak about your solidarity, sometimes it's just blah, blah, blah. We have to build very massive, popular people's movement for nuclear disarmament, including Russian nuclear weapons. I'm very wondering how people in Belarus and Russia, they're waiting, they're against the nuclear weapons, but nobody listens their voices. They're absolutely unrepresented anywhere. And people want to do something, but now the situation there, it's so complicated that we need to build the nuclear movement here based on diasporas groups and start to build the bridges, because I believe in diplomacy, but diplomacy is impossible without nonviolent pressure. Sorry to say this. So we have to build and we have to empower our voice from below in different initiatives. And why? We can do it through very practical cooperation. First of all, we need a lot of study visits, exchange, and even public debates, conferences here. I'm very shocked how people here in the Baltic states are isolated. If we invite somebody from Geneva, from Berlin, from, Paris, Rome, other countries, people are coming not even because they are sharing their ideas or they want to listen. They just want to see the people from other countries, because you cannot imagine that people never meet other people from UK or from Italy or from France or from other countries. And we have to use the billions of people to break the isolation. Second one, we really need study visas and exchange, because we have to build the movement from below. People have zero experience about nuclear disarmament or any kind of, anything connected to nuclear weapons. But they have a lot of military propaganda and a lot of propaganda of nuclear weapons. Because now in our region, we have some kind of gold rush. And so nuclear gold rush, like everybody is dreaming about nuclear weapons. We have to destroy it. We have to go to the public narratives with the idea of European nuclear disarmament. And this is why we need to support different bloggers and different media activists to promote the ideas in public sphere, because you cannot find any article, zero article about any possible ideas of nuclear disarmament, Russian or European or any nuclear weapons in our media. In Russian and Belarusian, in Ukrainian, in Baltic states, anywhere, it's zero, it's no discussion. We have to break the wall and start to discuss publicly how we can do it together, how we can start the negotiation tables and negotiation processes about nuclear disarmament, how we can new start, and new treaties, how we can pressure different governments to start to talk about. And for example, how we can do it. We have the idea of common marathon for nuclear disarmament, European nuclear disarmament. Can you imagine how it should be so inspiring idea if people together in different countries, in Belarus, in Russia, in Ukraine, in Poland, in Baltic states, in Scandinavia, maybe in UK, are running together because they want to show that there for nuclear disarmament, they want to remove nuclear weapons. We need such kind of actions, and we need cultural projects and with different nationalities to show how many we are, because we are many, we are majority, and we need to help for human rights defenders who is working for nuclear disarmament to use different international mechanisms in UN, in PACE, in OCE, and other platforms. Now I want to stop because my time is limited, but I want to ask you to think more deeply about very concrete steps, because now we have unbelievable unique situation when even small steps can have absolutely unbelievable huge impact. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Olga, for your very interesting remarks. Now we will go from Belarus to the UK. Sophie Bolt, she is the General Secretary of the UK Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, and she will address the renewed stationing of US nuclear weapons in the UK, the British nuclear build-up, and the dangers of stationing and nuclear sharing for our security. Sophie, we are listening to you.
Thank you very much. It's so great to be here with all of you. And I want to very much echo what Olga was saying about the importance of dialogue and us kind of working together. It's absolutely critical time. And massive thanks to Mayors for Peace for organising this absolutely critical meeting. As others have said, the threat of nuclear weapons being used once again in war is the highest that we've seen it since the Cold War. And the ongoing war in Ukraine has been the most serious nuclear flashpoint. I think it's incredibly dangerous that this conflict is continuing and it's not been brought to an end. We've seen the escalation in the use of US and British long-range missiles, but also Russia's nuclear-capable Orezhnik missile, and this has been followed by the testing of its nuclear-powered Berezhnik missile. And this is in the context of Russia having stationed nuclear weapons in Belarus, you know, the first time it's stationed nuclear weapons outside its own territory since the Cold War. And since last year, we now have a whole new generation of US nuclear bombs stationed at NATO bases across Europe and now here in Britain. And the significance of them now being in Britain means that we have the biggest number of US nuclear bases across Europe and here in Britain since the Cold War. And we've seen this of the nuclear sort of saber rattling by Trump and Putin, you know, throughout last year, culminating in Trump's statements about restarting explosive nuclear testing, I think have been a massive wake-up call that a new nuclear arms race is real and is underway. And I think it shows why it's absolutely so critical that this horrific conflict in Ukraine is brought to an end as soon as possible. You know, it's sort of shown why, you know, nuclear weapons do not keep us safe, why they cannot be part of any civilized so-called defense policy, because they are holding the entire world to ransom. And I think what we're also seeing is a whole new generation of people are starting to understand how serious the situation is, how serious the threat of nuclear weapons are, but also why nuclear disarmament is once again so critical. And we're definitely seeing, you know, a kind of greater level of awareness about the importance of, you know, arms control treaties like New START, which sounds, you know, sort of strange. This is something that's quite sort of technical and a bit sort of geeky, but more and more people are really starting to understand why we need this international framework of disarmament. And I think it's particularly critical that we really push for the extension of the START treaty, because it is between the countries have the biggest number of nuclear weapons in the world. So it's absolutely critical on that front. And, you know, we have seen some progress being, you know, made in relation to potentially sort of reaching an end, you know, an agreement to the end to the conflict. And within, you know, those frameworks, there was sort of mention and reference to a New START framework. And obviously this is to be welcomed. However, you know, it seems to me that, you know, despite these ongoing talks, you know, progress seems to be stalling. And certainly we are now seeing a sort of a silence on START. And I feel that, you know, now, you know, Trump's illegal military action against Venezuela, and now the, you know, these threats to military threats against Greenland are making the world, you know, an even more dangerous place. You know, the basis for these illegal actions and threats to Greenland, Canada, Panama, Latin America are really clearly laid out in Trump's national security strategy, which was published in December, and now the national defense strategy, which was published last week. Very similar documents. Both refer to the US restoring its preeminence in the world, including in the Western Hemisphere, as it calls it, so that the US can assert ourselves confidently where and when we need to in the region. And central to this strategy is the need for the most, as they state, the most robust, credible and modern nuclear deterrent. So nuclear weapons, you know, nuclear threat is unfortunately right at the heart of these strategies. And I think, you know, that's why we've seen, you know, these threats from Trump over restarting nuclear testing, as well as his call for like $1.5 trillion for the 2027 military budget. I mean, I think it's really clear, although it's obviously very welcome that these kind of military threats against Greenland have, you know, been put on hold or, you know, are not going to happen. I think that's very important. But I think we have to be clear that Trump's plan for Greenland is a military one, isn't it? It's about the expansion of the US missile defense system, or, you know, the Golden Dome, as Trump is calling it, you know, as well as trying to secure, you know, rare earth minerals, and the strategic role in terms of the sort of the new sort of shipping lanes that will be merging because of the climate crisis. It's also about militarism in terms of sort of the sort of the asserting of US kind of militarism and its role in that part of the world. So whilst we know that missile defense is very often presented as a defensive thing, in order for the US to be able to sort of shoot down incoming missiles. For those people who've seen the film House of Dynamite, that's all about these missiles coming into the US. In reality, it's an aggressive system. You know, it's an attempt for the US to reassert itself and reassert its nuclear preeminence, basically to a situation in 1945 when it was only the US that had nuclear weapons. And so that's so that the US can shoot down any retaliatory missiles to a US aggressive first strike. And this is why it's so serious, because this is part of the reason why we are seeing this increase in nuclear weapons and why we are also fearful of a nuclear arms race that's underway. Is this very sort of serious kind of threat to countries having nuclear weapons, or for those countries that don't have nuclear weapons and they feel that they have to now get them. For instance, you know, the real concerns around Trump's aggressive policy towards Iran. So, but we're also seeing another sort of shift going on. And this is Trump's sort of aggressive military agenda is it's so explicitly sort of America first. It's so sort of explicitly kind of colonial sort of self-interests of the US. And now it's not a huge shift in terms of US foreign policy, but the way it's being presented, you know, it's not being cloaked in this kind of spurious, you know, humanitarian or democratic concerns. It's absolutely explicit that this is about what's in the US interests. And so we're seeing these military threats, illegal actions, but also this ongoing economic coercion, you know, threats through trade tariffs. And this is having a really big impact globally on US allies. You know, and those US allies that are like most loyal to the US. And that's particularly the case in relation to Britain. You know, Britain is a key, very long-term ally of the US. Its military and nuclear subordination to the US has been entrenched since 1958 through what's called the Mutual Defense Agreement. And that enables the transfer of nuclear technology in order for Britain to actually have a nuclear weapon system that it can operate. And Trump's threats to Greenland, and as I say, these subsequent threats to impose these 10% tariffs on British as well as other NATO states against exports to the US. What that has been doing is it's sort of being intensifying a widening sort of division within the British political establishment over Britain's so-called special relationship with the US. So, and this has come out most notably around Britain's military and nuclear subordination to the US. So, you know, we've seen lots of challenges to Britain's nuclear dependence on the US and how this is driving British foreign and economic policy. You know, for instance, Britain won't stand up to Trump on anything because it's dependent on the US for its nuclear weapons. That's quite a sort of like a strong narrative that we're seeing here. And it's also starting to highlight the extent of US military presence in Britain. So we have like 18 US bases here, including now US nuclear weapons. So people might have seen that Zach Polanski, he's a sort of fairly new leader of the Green Party here. So when Trump was threatening Greenland, to invade Greenland, he called for, if that happens, he said like Britain needs to close down all of its US bases. And he got a huge amount of support for that. Polling was done showing that 55% of the population here in Britain totally supported that. So we're really seeing a shift going on. There are real kind of contradictions going on where you have countries that say like allies, very strong allies of the US that are coming under increasing pressure to be able to justify this special relationship when we're threatened by it. You know, we don't have the support and we're, you know, facing sort of economic kind of attacks as well. And as I say, there's also a much greater level of awareness and also opposition to US nuclear weapons being stationed in Britain. So over 61% of the population don't want US nuclear weapons in Britain. And that's because people rightly see Trump as very dangerous. You know, they see this relationship as being against the interests of the British population, but also, you know, more and more people are recognizing that these are against the interests of the rest of the world. So we're certainly seeing here, you know, a much bigger space is opening up to be able to challenge militarism, to challenge nuclear weapons, and also for a need for, you know, nuclear disarmament and strengthening of international arms control frameworks. And CND, you know, we're really pushing the British government to publicly support the extension of START. As people have said, it's, you know, of course, it's in everybody's interest for these two, the most biggest nuclear powers, you know, to continue, you know, with that treaty. We're also challenging our government's own expansion of its nuclear weapons. So they've purchased these F-35A nuclear capable jets from the US. This completely breaches the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. We've got a legal opinion on that. But also, it overwhelmingly will only tie Britain all the more closely to the Trump administration. So we're working really flat out to get this government to reverse this clearly like disastrous decision, really focusing on the huge amount of costs involved in these nuclear weapons, which certainly, you know, across the world, but certainly here in Britain, are completely spiraling out of control. And meanwhile, our populations are, you know, poverty is increasing and our public services are crumbling. But we're also doing more to spotlight these nuclear bases, to show people this is a manifestation of this military alliance with the US, which is putting us all at great risk. And then just finally, we're really doing lots of work with trade unions for an alternative defence strategy based on reducing military spending and redirecting the funds to focus on tackling real human security issues we face, reducing social deprivation and prioritising climate action, but also exposing the lie about the defence dividend. You know, this whole thing about it will create loads of jobs, it'll be really great for the economy. We are doing lots of research to show that is the total opposite. Yeah, that actually there's a very strong link between communities that are dominated by these big arms companies and social deprivation. And of course, they do not create, you know, anywhere near the type of jobs that we need. And of course, we're saying we need to have a sustainable defence policy that really is focusing on the, as I say, the real human security issues that we face. And we're getting very, very strong support from across the trade union movement. And then finally, we're also supporting, there's a big European Peace Summit here in Britain in June, which, you know, again, as like Olga was saying, it's so important that we're talking to each other, that we're building, you know, those links and that coordination and getting inspiration from each other. Because, you know, as I say, this is such an important meeting. This international discussion is so vital because we have to build global cooperation, don't we? That's what we've got to build. That's the only way that we're going to be able to sort of bring about the peaceful, sustainable, nuclear-free future that we also desperately need. And of course, we will get there. We will get there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophie, for the view from the UK. And now we will fly from the UK to Croatia, where Professor Tonči Tadić is the head of fusion research at the Ruda Boskovic Institute in Zagreb. So Professor Tadić is an academic physicist. He has taught at quite a number of universities also abroad. And what is particularly interesting, he has combined this with political engagement. He served as a member of the parliament in Croatia. And I invite you now, Tonči, to outline the nuclear risk in the new political environment.
Thank you. Our current debate on nuclear disarmament must be conducted in the light of the circumstances in which we live today, created after the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, which indicate that we are living in the Second Cold War. The possibility of reducing nuclear arsenals and the possibility of stopping nuclear proliferation should therefore be viewed in the context of the Second Cold War in which we are living now. Everything we have seen in the First Cold War, we have today again. Threats of an imminent nuclear attack. I counted 55 Russian nuclear threats addressed to the European Union member states which are supporting Ukraine. The threat of new sophisticated carriers of the nuclear warheads in the air and under the sea, from the new Russian nuclear-powered Burevestnik cruise missile over hypersonic missiles to the Russian nuclear torpedo Poseidon, and the American announcement of the renewal of nuclear tests. In addition to that, we are facing a new nuclear arms race, but also the emergence of new nuclear powers. The period of extension of New START will soon end on February 5, 2026. I do not believe that there will be enough political will in both USA and Russia to sign an extension of the New START, since nuclear arsenal is a sign of might for both Mr. Putin and Mr. Trump. However, it is of strategic importance to sign and ratify the continuation of the New START agreement, that is, to guarantee that after February 5, 2026, we are not in a legal vacuum regarding the limitation of the largest strategic nuclear arsenals in the world. But how did we get to the current state of affairs within 4 years? Current nuclear insecurity in the world is a consequence of irresponsible statements by the leaders of two permanent members of the UN Security Council. The permanent members of Security Council should set an example for everyone else in the world regarding nuclear proliferation, showing to everyone in the world that security comes through limiting of nuclear arsenals, not through proliferation. Instead, we had a series of immoderate or rather belligerent statements from Russia about possible nuclear attack on countries that are helping Ukraine, all with the aim of proving its power on the international stage by reminding us on its own nuclear arsenal. On the other hand, we had a series of immoderate statements from the USA regarding doubts whether the nuclear umbrella of USA should continue to be applied to American allies or not. I mean, not only to American allies in Europe, but also allies in the Far East, not to mention the recent threat of war within NATO regarding the Trump annexation of Greenland. Such reckless statements logically cause fear among decision makers in our American allies, who quite logically wonder whether everyone who can should acquire their own nuclear arsenal for their own security or for deterrence. Ukraine is often cited as an example, namely Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal and with security guarantees from USA, UK, and Russia, only to become a victim of Russian aggression and without clear security guarantees and without any indication of imminent end to the war. But here I would like to mention one key logical trap that all those planning nuclear strategies in USA and in Russia are falling into, namely ignoring international law and the UN Charter and planning a new international order based solely on force, that is on nuclear arsenals, is actually a dead end. Here is why. In addition to the largest nuclear powers, the USA and Russia, along with China, Britain, and France, we have also new nuclear powers, India, Pakistan, North Korea, and allegedly Israel. And now imagine what will happen in the next 4 years, if all G20 countries start building their own nuclear arsenals, with the justification that it's not expensive, some 50 billion euros, if it guarantees nuclear national security. We already have Belarus, which received the Russian nuclear arsenal. We also have Poland, which wants to have a part of NATO nuclear arsenal, even though the NATO arsenal is currently only in the old NATO members, UK, France, Italy, and Turkey. But who knows? If excluded from American nuclear umbrella, this may lead to more nuclear arsenals in Europe and also in the Far East. In the Republic of Korea, there are voices about nuclear arsenal, even in Japan. There are voices about building their own nuclear arsenal. So let me remind you on two key rules that apply to nuclear weapons. The first one is that the country that acquires nuclear arsenal ceases to be concerned about its own security, which gives a false sense of power. And the second, after one country in one micro-region acquires it, all others around acquires also their own nuclear arsenal. And here comes the problem. Because anyone who plans nuclear strategies must necessarily take into account the unpredictability of potential allies in potential nuclear conflict. The problem of multiplying the nuclear arsenals is very similar to the problem of the naval arms race in the eve of the First World War, World War I, when United Kingdom sought to have a war fleet larger than any two other war fleets combined. So if we have only two sides in a nuclear war, let's say country A and country B, everything is clear. However, if both of them are reckless and unpredictable, everything ends in establishing of new nuclear powers, say C, D, E, and F. So if aside of nuclear power A and B, there are also other nuclear powers, B, C, D, E, and F, it is not clear how they will be positioned in the event of conflict. Will there be on side A or on side B, or they will be neutral? So the logical answer is that country A, nuclear power, should have its nuclear arsenal larger not only than their opponent in country B, but also with all other combined, B plus C plus B plus C plus F. And so in circle, the same of course in the country B, but also in all others, as far as their defense budget allows, since there are no limits when it comes to national nuclear security. And all of this leads to a senseless spiral of growth of nuclear arsenals in all nuclear powers, which accelerates with the multiplication of number of nuclear powers in the world, based on the recklessness of the two largest nuclear powers. So the only reasonable response to this madness is adherence to international law and the UN Charter. Therefore, the first necessary step in the limiting of nuclear arsenals in the first place is signing an extension of New START to limit two largest nuclear arsenals in two largest nuclear powers in USA and Russia. And the second logical step after that would be multilateral agreement on the limitation of nuclear arsenals, which should be signed by all other nuclear powers in the world. And this is a realistic approach. Only after that we can achieve our goals of limiting, reducing, and abolishing nuclear arsenals. So to repeat you once again, if two main nuclear powers are reckless, there will be many more nuclear powers, which would lead to increase of nuclear arsenals of two main nuclear powers from the fear that they will not know how the other nuclear powers will combine in the event of conflict of the big two, which leads to the spiral of growth of all nuclear arsenals. And this is utter madness, and this has to be stopped. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Donchi. I think you had a very strong and clear message against nuclear proliferation. And of course, I liked how you combined having nuclear weapons with reckless, because already the fact that someone has nuclear weapons, of course, is a great danger to mankind and is a reckless behavior. So thank you so much. And now we will go to Germany. We will hear now from Jana Baldus from the Peace Research Institute Frankfurt, and she is also very active in the European Leadership Network. I would say Jana is one of the rising stars in the academic disarmament field. And I invite you, Jana, to address the impact of a world without limits on nuclear weapons, and certainly also to bring in the TPNW, the success of the TPNW. Jana, you have the floor.
Thank you, Thomas, also for the kind introduction. And of course, thank you to the invitation and the inspiring words from my previous speakers. I'm going to try to walk through my notes in 5 minutes, so we have a bit more time for the Q&A. And I will generally talk about the state of disarmament, starting very pessimistic with New START and then getting slightly more optimistic with the TPNW, hopefully, and then see where we end. So we already heard that the end of New START will have systematic effects, security consequences beyond USA and Russia, and even beyond the 5 official nuclear weapon states, of course. So the removal of the constraints on the 2 largest arsenals will undercut security worldwide. We have the realistic chances that we will see a new arms race, not within the next year, probably, because building nuclear weapons takes slightly more time than a year, but in the coming years. And of course, we will see unconstrained nuclear competition in a time of already heightened geopolitical rivalry. So one of the problems is that the end of arms control treaties, as well as the nuclear buildups that we see in China, that we also see in Europe partly, is often framed as rational security response, while in practice, these build-ups can increase complexity, raise the risk of accidental, inadvertent, or unauthorized use, strengthen the incentives of actually using nuclear weapons preemptively, while they reduce the trust and incentives for cooperation. And as Tonchi has said, the signaling here matters. By abandoning the limits and by building up arsenals, obviously USA and Russia communicate that nuclear weapons remain central to their politics, as do, of course, UK and France in centering, or NATO in centering nuclear deterrence, which increases the importance of nuclear weapons in the whole international community, obviously, and the importance that states assign to them. And this is pretty much the opposite of what most states have been calling for in the past years. So what we see is a problem of timing and a problem of lack of alternatives, actually. Just to be clear, it's too late to prevent the expiration of New START. This is just not possible. We could only try to partially rescue or alleviate the consequences. So New START had only permitted a 5-year extension, 5-year extension, which was used in 2021. Any renewal would need the renewed ratification of the treaty in the US and Russia, which is just not realistic within 1 week and also not politically realistic. That said, we heard a lot of talk in the past weeks about a temporary political commitment to adhere to the ceilings of New START. And this, of course, would be currently the best case because it would create some diplomatic space. But of course, the chances that this will happen within a week are also quite unrealistic. So can the generally arms control space, disarmament space, be renewed with a follow-on agreement, a deal that Trump gets from his head? And there we see that we are dealing with kind of a lack of alternatives in the arms control and disarmament space, at least in this bilateral space. Because the problem is that new negotiations after New START will have to start from scratch. And it will be difficult to navigate all the political priorities and just frankly to gather the political will and support within the nuclear weapon states and also their allied states that have been quite critical, for instance, about the offer by Russia to extend the commitments of New START. So any successor framework would have to account for perceived imbalances between capabilities, missile defense, emerging technologies, etc., and of course deal with the pressure to include China. And secondly, the timing of the New START expiration is also quite problematic currently because we're seeing the NPT REFCON is coming up soon. And with the last disarmament arms control treaty expiring, this will only create more mistrust between nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states in the NPT and just cement the image that nuclear weapon states regard the disarmament commitments as conditional, reversible, and low priority. So where I actually want to go with is that what we see currently in nuclear disarmament and arms control is not just a lack of political will, but kind of a narrow imagination in dealing with the situation. And just going back to what Melissa has said in the beginning, that there would actually be the need to have more human imagination, more creativity to deal with the problems. I think this lack of creativity is very visible in the NPT and arms control debates. Just coming back to the most creative idea I have heard in the last 5 years, or new innovative idea, was to bring in China for arms control negotiations, which is after 5 years not so new. While we see a lot of repackaging of disarmament proposals under the banner of risk reduction now, to make them more appealing to nuclear weapon states. What I would like to say, and again, coming back to Melissa, what she's said in the beginning, I think the TPNW has been one of the most innovative and creative disarmament initiatives in the past years, precisely because it actually tries to reverse claims that have long been treated as the absolute truth in the nuclear order, including the assumption that nuclear weapons brings stability and peace for all, just by centering around kind of the premise that as long as nuclear weapons exist, nuclear use remains possible, and of course, nuclear annihilation remains possible. And I think it's fair to say that even without the participation by nuclear weapon states or NATO members, the TPNW had a real normative impact. It still preserves and strengthens the disarmament norm at a time when we see arms control and disarmament eroding, and it shifts the burden of justification. So instead of asking why disarmament is unrealistic, it asks why continued reliance on nuclear weapons is acceptable or should be acceptable. And I think this is one of the most important points, because this can create a political and legal reference point that member states as well as civil society can use to challenge the idea that nuclear weapons are and will be permanent futures of international politics, and will just complicate claims that nuclear deterrence is universally stabilizing. I have a lot more things to say, but I'm just going to leave this by that, just to say that I think it's great that the TPNW turns 5 years. This has turned 5 years, and just congratulations, of course, also to you, Thomas, for negotiating it. Of course, to ICANN for their work on the treaty. I think this is very invaluable in this time.
Thank you so much, Jana. You had very important points in your presentation. Perhaps picking up on the last ones. I mean, we shouldn't just accept kind of brainwashing by nuclear weapon states. What is supposedly good for us, nuclear weapons would protect us. I mean, as the Austrian foreign minister has said already several times in the UN General Assembly, no, they are a threat to our security. And that, in fact, nobody can contradict, because we all know what nuclear weapons do, and they don't respect any borders. So we have still a couple of minutes for question and answer period. It's not too much. I see the clock, it's about 13 minutes. So I would like to invite you, in case you want to pose a short question, raise your hand on Zoom. And please refrain from lengthy interventions as a matter of fairness to the others, and introduce yourself very briefly. I think we will collect now 3 questions and then go back to the speakers to address them. So who wants to put forward the first question? Well, I think somebody has to be the icebreaker. So, nobody? That's interesting.
Jackie's in the queue.
There's one. Jackie Cabasso.
Jackie, please.
Yeah, hi. I wasn't going to say anything, being, I think, the only American on here. I just wonder if any of the speakers would like to comment on the role that growing nationalism seemed to be playing in the nuclear field.
Thank you, Jackie, and good morning to California.
Good morning. Yes.
Okay, nationalism, very important. Impact of nationalism. What would be the second question? Well, if there's none, we can already address the first question, and then we will see whether somebody else still has a question. Who wants to address the nationalism? I think Sophie has addressed this a lot in her intervention. Anybody else of the speakers? No?
Oh, I think
Olga can speak about this very well, I'm sure.
Sophie?
No, Olga, go ahead.
Olga.
But maybe Sophie is first, and so she's so inspiring.
No, you go first. I was still thinking.
Yeah. Okay,
in my
Olga
opinion,
goes first.
Of course, I can speak only about my region, as I see the very dangerous and very toxic trends. So in my opinion, now we have increasing or jumping the nationalist trends everywhere from both sides of the war. And this is the problem, because if we speak about nationalists, it's always about ultra-right or right-wing. And secondly, it's very connected to other problems like militarism, anti-feminist agenda, and also very jumping back to the very clear patriarchal norms and roles in our societies. And of course, if you speak about nationalists trends, it's connected to the culture of enemy. So people don't speak about how to build the dialogue, because this is some kind of like struggling between who is the best or the strongest man in the world, and people think much more about, how do you say, about their ego, but not about common good and interest. It's really big problem, and in my opinion, and also the problem that everybody here, I see this in Lithuania, but also again in Belarus, Russia, Ukraine, it doesn't matter. Everybody is sitting in the ethnic bubbles, and the bubbles are totally isolated each other. And this is very, very dangerous trend, because if we are Belarusians, like against the whole world or other nations, it's very easy to increase the escalation, military escalation. And now many politicians try to have political benefits from the statements like culture of enemy, hate speech, and escalation of the war, etc. People, the politicians push the process to the very, very bad very, very bad path. So,
Definitely.
sorry.
Thank you.
A little bit emotional, but I'm angry.
It was very good. Okay. Anybody else wants to address this of the speakers, or should we go to a second? Yeah, Sophie, please.
Yes. I certainly here in Britain, we are seeing this kind of militaristic kind of patriotism, where you have Keir Starmer sort of standing with the Union Jack flags behind him, saying how proud we are that we are, reorienting our economy to a war economy. We are so proud that we are building more nuclear weapons. We are so proud that young people, can go and work, in the sort of the arms industry and become soldiers, and all of this. And it is very, very toxic and very, very dangerous. And what we're seeing is that it's sort of feeding into the growth of the far right here in Britain around this kind of patriotism and sort of wrapping yourself up in the Union Jack, and that is sort of, so it's having a kind of mutually reinforcing relationship, and of course, as Olga says, this like whipping up of sort of racism and xenophobia is all about creating enemies. And we are seeing that, definitely here, 100%. But it's also impacting freedom of speech. So it's saying if you're patriotic, then you will not question this war agenda. And so we're seeing in relation to the genocide against the Palestinian people, there's a huge shutdown around sort of freedom of speech around this. But it's sort of becoming kind of much wider. So that's obviously sort of very dangerous as well. So yeah, completely. It's very serious here. We've had the biggest mobilizations of the far right in British history here just sort of last year. So what's good is that people understand what a serious threat this is. They are kind of making the links, and we are having sort of a new kind of movement coming together that's sort of against this the rise of the far right, that's bringing together very, very diverse section of the population. So yeah, and obviously from CND's point of view, we're sort of saying it's this kind of like war patriotism that's part of the problem, and we've got to kind of end that.
Thank you so much.
Can I shortly just add a quick kind of international perspective, because I think the problem is not, and I think Sophie and Olga spoke to that as well, it's not just a nationalist but a populist movements, obviously, and that often go obviously hand in hand. And what we see with both the nationalism and the populism is obviously looking for simple solutions, backtracking from any multilateralist solutions. And I think this is one of the things that has been salient with arms control treaties, that in this case Donald Trump looked to please some parts of his population, while also, of course, seeking a simple solution, which is we don't need any arms control if we have kind of a unilateral moment again for us. And on the other hand, and I think this is the danger that it's getting incredibly hard to look for multilateral solutions than if those leaders such as Trump as well as Putin, obviously, don't look for these kind of long-term strategies to actually react to any nuclear risks.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very important point. Yeah.
Can I add also? And also, it's very important to mention that the nationalists, such kind of politicians, they're very, very effective in some kind of hate campaigns or bullying campaigns of everyone who doesn't want to play in the game. And this is why majority who is for nuclear disarmament, in reality, they keep silence because they're afraid such kind of attacks. It's some kind of very interesting model. It's very workable now.
Definitely, yeah. By giving priority to your, I would say, rather selfish national interest, you deny equal rights to the others, and you don't hide your acceptance. You create conflict. And that's what we have seen so often in history, and I don't want to revisit it. Yeah, Tonji, please.
Okay, so what we are talking here is first nationalist populism. I cannot agree that patriotism is bad, because then I cannot be a good man. I'm patriot. I like Croatia, like Olga likes Belarus, or Sophie likes UK. Okay, but we are talking about reckless populism, and we are talking in particular of reckless populism in nuclear-armed countries. It's totally different. What we see in Eastern Europe is actually Russian nuclear blackmail. We have nuclear arsenal, ergo we want to conquer the Ukraine, or we want to get 1/5, 1/2, whatever, and if you don't give it to us, we will use our nuclear power. So this reckless populism based on nuclear might is actually things which is very dangerous. And this is something totally new, contrary to the First Cold War. In the First Cold War, we, for entire duration, for 45 years, we had, in very few cases, maybe Cuban crisis, there was imminent threat of a nuclear war. But never in entire First Cold War were nuclear arsenal used for a nuclear blackmail of Western alliance. This is something that is very bad, in my opinion, and we have to be very careful not to forget this fact. So this mafia style, Vito Corleone style, I want that you do for me this, or I will burn your house, and so this is something that is totally new in this Second Cold War, introduced, of course, by Mr. Putin. Trump, on the other hand, has totally different addition to this mess. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think you made some very good points. I mean, I think Putin is the one perhaps to criticize that patriotism has got a very bad reputation, because what he always calls patriotic war and so on, of course. So that's quite clear. And what we see is, of course, that nuclear weapons are more and more used for coercion. Because in reality, everybody knows you cannot use them, because they will do such a tremendous damage also to your own country.
There was one question in chat about China, which we're not addressing here, but we have to say a few words. China is increasing its nuclear arsenal, and they are developing new methods of delivering nuclear weapons. And they are currently in some kind of shadow of two big nuclear powers. But I'm certain that China's increased nuclear arsenal will be a stark warning to the Far East, to the Japan and to South Korea. So we have to be very, very careful about Chinese development of nuclear arsenal. This is also a threat to India.
Yeah, definitely. I think the rising nuclear arsenal, like in China, is a tremendous danger. And it's very regrettable that the US did not get into a dialogue with China, because at a certain point the Chinese had been willing, but the US were not willing to touch these issues the Chinese were interested in, of course. But I think we could go on for a long time, but we have totally completed the time slot that was given to us. So I really want to thank you, especially, of course, the speakers, for your very important contributions, and also to all participants we still have so many participants for their interest and patience. And I would like to end by a message from the president of Mayors for Peace, the mayor of Hiroshima, who sent us for this webinar some thoughts. And I think he is totally right when he says we have to get away from security policies rooted in narrow self-interest and nuclear deterrence. Without the elimination of nuclear weapons, the world faces the risk that the unspeakable suffering of the victims of the nuclear bombings 80 years ago could be relived and revisited by hundreds of thousands, if not millions, in our age. And I think that is really the core of it. It's about life and death, and it's not a strategic game that we play on the board. So thank you so much, and have a nice evening still. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Great, Olga. Thank you.